At the risk of stealing the publicity information from his book, our next guest has survived against the odds. He overcame a troubled childhood to become a footballer, but was then diagnosed with cancer at 23. He beat the disease and continued his career, only for it to return 3 years later. He defeated cancer again, but was forced to retire 3 years ago at the age of 30. In the week of Mental Health Awareness Day, I can't think of a more perfect guest to invite on this week's official EFL podcast than the former Rochdale midfielder and now motivational speaker, Joe Thompson. And I can't help but ask the question I'm sure everybody does: where on earth you found the strength to overcome all those obstacles?
So firstly, for me, I always try and use that trauma to triumph. I think if you find adversity and you perceive adversity as growth, that will always help you through the carnage. I think upbringing was one of the main things. My mum's always instilled in me, to be resilient, to keep going, never give up. So that's testament to her, because she's an absolute wonderful woman, and my inspiration. And then as I've obviously gotten older and had my own family, I've really needed to lean on them at times, my wife, even my daughter, because it has been hard, but they've always been my reminders. So, the question a lot of the time is, how have you managed to? But why I've managed to get through it is because of those guys.
I mean, yes, but I guess in the case of the two cancers, there's the physical aspect as well, which is you're obviously a very positive person. You've obviously got your why established, but when the body is weak and fighting as well, that can do strange things with the head, can it not?
Most definitely. And it's no surprise really that, the work that I do now with the league football education, the Premier League and the PFA, a lot of my work is with the younger ones around mentoring them in regards to mindset. Because for me, fundamentally, not once but twice, my body has had something, extremely wrong with it. So dealing with the chemotherapy and the treatment and the stem cell transplant is one thing, but mentally getting your head around it is another thing. So there's little things that I do on a day-to-day basis, but I also know having an element of fitness in your life improves your mental health massively.
Yeah. Are you increasingly aware of how your own, well, not just story, Joe, but stories inspires others?
Yeah. And I suppose you have that kind of internal war with yourself that, well, who's going to want to, hear my story? And that imposter syndrome tends to kick in. But the feedback that I get from talks, going into various businesses, or just having a conversation with someone is incredible. And that's why I get up in the morning, to try and help people. And I haven't always been like that. It has changed my outlook and perspective on life. I was almost a closed book with quite a lot of trust issues. But I also think true strength comes from being vulnerable and acknowledging those vulnerabilities, and then obviously speaking about it and trying to help others.
I mean, have you surprised yourself? Because you've talked already in the short time that we have been having this conversation about a lot of different stuff. This kid that was obsessed with being a footballer, that wasn't going to take no for an answer, now finds himself standing in front of business leaders, standing in front of kids at a very vulnerable point of their life, perhaps crossing paths with somebody that's got some sort of big challenge going on in their lives and can't see the end of the tunnel. That's a long way from kicking a ball around.
Yeah, and it comes with a lot of responsibility and pressures, I suppose, because if I go into any building, any organization or football club, I have to embody it, and it's got to resonate. So I do my homework prior, and I pride myself on that. But it's also being aware of little cues in the room and little things that people might do when you mention certain things. But just being transparent and honest. You know, we live in a world where I suppose there's a lot of it's fake at times. It really is. And you know, you can see people's social media and they paint that, you know, perfect picture. Everyone's got troubles. They all come in different ways, and people deal with them in different ways as well. So I just try and be as honest and as transparent as possible, and hopefully that then allows people to open up to me, and then I can start to implement things that they can use long term.
And it needs those that have made it or are making it to make statements like, I have imposter syndrome sometimes. I'm not the finished article. My life might look glossy on the surface, but below there's all sorts of stuff going on. Because I think those that haven't made it yet have this perception that you reach a point where you do and life becomes rosy. And it's an ongoing process, is it not?
It is. And, you know, I think just with that question there, arguably, I faced my biggest challenge post football. So we lost a little baby boy last year, Dre, and he was 2 days away from his due date. And it was the most traumatic experience I've ever been a part of, because I was a part of it. But to witness my wife and how she gave birth to him, the most elegant and most beautiful way, was like incredible. So I kind of parked my stuff and was like, wow, yes, I've had to, you know, overcome some big challenges. But for a woman to do that and the way she did it was like, that was inspiring to me. So it is, you know, life and everything throws up these curveballs. And I always say it's just about how you deal with it and how you react to it. And once you overcome it, you'll be a better person, a much stronger person. But I always say, make sure you try and help others along the way.
Joe, I didn't know that story, and I asked the question again. I mean, where on earth does your personal resilience come from that you can deal with so many of these major life events in a relatively short space of time in the past
Yeah,
decade?
well, when we look back at it, we go like, wow, you know, everyone always say these last 10 years have flown by. They have, but they've been very difficult. And in the middle of all that, I have a little girl who's now 10. And she's had to deal with certain things. My upbringing was totally different to Lula's, but she's encountered some big things that I never had to deal with at such a young age. So I know she's going to be a beacon of light for people in the future. And, you know, looking at it as a whole, I just experienced the best experience of my life after having such a horrendous year last year, whereby we had our little baby girl 6 weeks ago, Athena. And like, she came into our life after we've been told we never have children naturally. We go down all the IVF route, and it was tough because I always just felt like I was a bit of a support act and I wasn't quite a part of it. So to be able to do that and experience that, you know, it really brought back the magic of children and just childbirth in itself. And yeah, it was amazing. So I always just think better times are on the horizon. They are. So just try and find that clarity in all the chaos. Maybe strip back to basics and just get over the little things and just make sure you do those right. And that just starts with getting up on time, doing what you say you're going to do, and then you can work from there and build from there.
Sure, you are an absolute inspiration. I almost feel like I'm trivializing this conversation to ask if you can in any way relate to sacked football managers and the traumas that they may be facing right now. I mean, Steve Bruce has gone this week from West Brom. James Rowberry's gone from Newport County. Kevin Betsy's gone from Crawley Town. Steve Bruce will be used to it, but hurt nevertheless. The other two, first-time managers, I mean, the pain that they will be going through right now, not on the scale that you've experienced and we've just been talking about, but nevertheless, the public, Phil Brown used the phrase on this podcast a few weeks ago, humiliation of being pushed out the door.
Yeah, and you know, I always say and try and normalize the conversation around my stuff. it's a setback. So how do you deal with that setback? And, when you look at those three managers in particular, all at different stages in their career, I commended Kevin Betsy. I used to play against him. I've watched his Arsenal team when I've done work for MUTV and Man United. I know that he's got a great future in the game. So it was a risk to go and, take yourself down to Crawley and try and find your way in the EFL. But he'll come back stronger from it. And same too with James Rowberry, a man of the people, a man of the club. And, we did amazing things with him, in particular over the last year or so. And then when you look at Steve Bruce, over 1,000 games in management, that's testament to him. And it's a setback that they're going to have to overcome. And you got to ask yourself, well, do you want to go again? And that was it for me with football. First time round with the cancer side of things, I wanted to prove people wrong. Second time round, I wanted to prove myself right and show that I could actually get back there and do what I always loved. And then once I scored that goal on the end of the season, that was it for me. On to pastures new and new challenges into business and, outside of football. But then in time, try and bring it all back together. And I hope I'm doing a good job at it. But back to those three managers, it's a setback. And they've just got to ask themselves the question, is this what I want to do? Where do I want to go next? And start to put things in place from there.
You've been in and around dressing rooms in the previous part of your career. If you take somebody like Steve Bruce, they were fifth when he arrived. He leaves them in the bottom three. It's their lowest league position for 20 years. I'm just looking at these stats now. 11 points from 33 this season. 7 league wins in 30 overall. Sometimes in football, Joe, does stuff happen that none of us can quite work out? Everything seems logical. You could argue that of Chris Wilder at Middlesbrough as well, who obviously went last week. But just sometimes, for whatever reason, it's not meant to be.
Yeah, definitely. You're going with all the right intentions, but for whatever reason, it might not work. So you got to look at the Steve Bruce situation. 8 draws as well. Turn a few of those into wins, and they've been tight games, clearly. You just got to look at the last one, 0-0. A chance goes your way, it can be a totally different story. So, yeah, answer to your question, sometimes it just doesn't work. And, you got to have the right person in the right chair. And it's just not been the case with a few of these managers this season so far.
And when a manager is under pressure and he's getting pelters from the crowd, and clearly social media and local media outlets are letting them have it a wee bit, I wonder what effect it has on the kind of dressing room, because 24 blokes all in a tight space working together 5-6 times a week, there's a lot of different personalities in there.
There is, and I've listened to a few people, and I think it's Richie Wellens last week on the podcast. Everyone knows what the situation is; they're fully aware of it. And some people might not like the manager. You're on the bench or out the squad, and you'd be wanting him to move on. But it is. I remember when I was at Rochdale, the manager's gone. It's like, right, well, who's at the helm? And you do have to reset, and then obviously everyone's a bit unsure of what's going to happen on the weekend and who's coming in. Have I played against this manager before? Is he going to like me? Am I his type of player? All of those things start running through your mind. But it's testament to a lot of footballers that they can deal with change very well. And they have to do that on the pitch, on a day-to-day basis, on the training ground. And managers are no different, to the players. So it's something that I think is a transferable skill. But it is very difficult to deal with change, particularly when managers have moved on.
Despite the sad subject matter of a lot of this, you've made me smile for a big chunk of our conversation, but none more than when you said you were a listener to the official EFL podcast. I'm having that as an endorsement on publicity, as listened to by Joe Thompson. I'm having a bit of that. Listen, the other point is, I wonder whether as well, we live in, and you can relate to this with one of your other roles, which is you do the squad goals program on local radio.
Yeah.
The tendency for us to write managers in particular off. There's this human wastage factor. I know Carlos Corberan's been linked to the West Brom job, and he was linked to the Middlesbrough job. And I saw some Middlesbrough fan message something along the lines of, we don't want a failure coming here. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a bloke who led Huddersfield Town to the playoff final, was 90 minutes away from the Premier League. And the perceptions in people's head are that Carlos Corberan is a failure as a manager.
I know, and that's this cancel culture, isn't it? It's very ruthless kind of world we live in at times. But that's why I also say, try to block that noise out, because it really doesn't matter. You know, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and people's opinions, they're going to have them. It's just the way the world is, and you can't please everyone. But it is interesting to see reactions, you know, from fans and people within football when certain names are assigned to certain jobs. Everyone's got a voice and everyone's got an opinion on it. But that's where club owners and, you know, chief execs and sporting directors have to make the right decisions.
Yeah, well, too right, because, and I've been there myself as a supporter, sometimes our perceptions of the truth are nowhere near the actual truth.
Yeah, and I always say, you've got to remember there's a massive human element to football, and managers are just like players, are just like people. They've got their own family, they've got their own life. This is their profession and what they want to do, and they love it. But it does come with a lot of challenges. So I always say, you know, if you can, try and empathize with them. And I always say to supporters, if you really want to get behind your team, get down on a Saturday and cheer them on. And you watch how a game can change when the crowd gets behind you, because you can be that 12th man and really get the momentum. And then once you get that couple of wins, you see it. The big Mo starts to roll in and you're unstoppable then.
Yeah. Well, on that subject, I'm looking at the top of the Sky Bet Championship table, and my eyes are immediately drawn to Swansea City. One win in their first 7, and then suddenly Russell Martin's team have won 5 of their last 6, and some big teams along the way there as well. Sometimes does a season come down to a click moment where something happens and it just stops the rot and sends the little hamster wheel going in the right direction?
Yeah, it does. It might be a meeting that people have behind closed doors. It might be a training session that's just electric and everything works. Or it might just be a little bit of a rubber green where a game's in the balance and it goes your way. And then I always say to players now when they're transitioning out, you very rarely remember like the big wins, but the one wins that you do remember is those scruffy 1-0 wins where you're all in it together, backs against the wall, and you're looking at each other like who's going to be the hero, and someone inevitably is, whether it's on the line clearance, a goalkeeper pulls out a worldie, but it is sometimes it's just a click moment where it all falls into place. And then, yeah, soon after 2 or 3 weeks, with the way the fixtures are, things are forgotten.
I'm just, again, looking at the top of that table. I mean, Sheffield United, Norwich, Burnley were obviously tipped to be in there. I mean, I just love the rest of it.
Who would it?
Yeah, honestly. Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because I know a lot of people would have wrote Paul Ince off and Reading off at the start of the season, but he's really galvanised that club. And I know you've had Tom on as well. That was an interesting dynamic to hear how he dealt with having a gaffer at work and then going home and having dinner with Dad. But yeah, it's Reading. I never would have thought they'd be up at 5th as we stand.
Yeah. Well, I think what we might do is start to send you out into the community to recount different episodes of the official EFL podcast. Because it's quite clear to me, Joe Thompson, you've memorized every single one. Your fixtures, your fixtures this coming weekend, then early kickoff. Luton Town against QPR have won 4 of their last 5. It's 4th v 6th as Burnley entertain Swansea City. 5th place Reading entertain West Brom. Sheffield United, the leaders, they've lost the last two. They are at home to Blackpool, and then Watford entertain Norwich City in a late kickoff on Saturday. Norwich in second, one win the last four after 6 consecutive. I'm looking at Sky Bet League One, and my eyes are drawn at the foot of the table, Joe, or near the foot of the table, to MK Dons. I mean, they did lose Scott Twine, they did lose Harry Darling, but only 3 league wins in 13 so far, lost 5 of their last 6. It's quite a stark contrast to the run they got themselves on last season.
Yeah, and we spoke about Russell Martin before. Obviously, he departed previous season, and Liam Manning came in, and he just kept that momentum. And they did ever so well, but they have lost, key players. The 2 in particular that you mentioned, and they've just struggled to get those performances and that consistency. So I wouldn't have expected MK Dons to be down there, nor so did I expect Oxford United to be there.
Yeah.
But a couple of wins will drag you out of it. But yeah, sooner rather than later for MK Dons fans, no doubt.
Fixtures this coming weekend. Bolton v Barnsley is 7th v 6th. The bottom 2 face each other as Burton Albion entertain Morecambe. 3rd place Sheffield Wednesday head to Cambridge. 2nd place Ipswich at home to Lincoln City. Plymouth it is who travel to MK Dons. The leaders have won 8 of their last 9. Now, I don't want to get repetitive, but I have been gasping in awe for the last few weeks about Plymouth. I mean, that's unbelievable form they're in, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, 4 wins on the spin as well for Stephen Schumacher's men. And that's another young manager in the game that I've played against. And it's great to see Stephen Schumacher doing that, because when Ryan Lowe obviously left Plymouth to go up to Preston, I thought Shuey would go with him. But he's had the courage and the bravery to step forward. And it's great to see what he's doing down there with Plymouth Argyle, because, 31 points already after 13 games. That's setting them up really good come Christmas, and then it'll be an interesting running for Plymouth Argyle in the second half of the season.
You better believe it. 4th place, Peterborough head to Wickham then Monday night. Portsmouth, who are 5th, no wins in their last 3 after 6 consecutive. They are at Charlton into Sky Bet League 2, and we could not get you on here without asking you about Rochdale this season, which does feel like a very different club to the one that you were at just a few years ago.
Yeah, it is. There's been a lot of change, and I haven't, because of, squad goals on a weekend and on a Tuesday as well, I haven't been to as many games